Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for episode 293 of Album of the Day, in which for today's album review, I'm going to be talking about a band, or rather, I'd say a musical project of a singer, songwriter, composer known as Haley Dahl, who's been playing music for about a decade, at least it seems, and she and her band is also known for having arguably now one of the biggest stars in indie music right now, Phoebe Bridgers on bass, who did leave the band around the mid-2010s to pursue her own solo career, but Haley Dahl's been going on with her band, and the band that I'm talking about here is known as Sloppy Jane, and they've had a kind of interesting evolution lately. They've evolved from a kind of experimental, sort of artsy punk and rock outfit that has a significantly wild and kind of theatrical live performances, but on this latest record have evolved to more of an ornate chamber pop sort of style. And I'm here to review the newest record from Sloppy Jane, which was released on November 5th, 2021. And the album's called Madison. I recently got this on vinyl for Christmas. And you've probably, if you've seen the What's on Repeat I did recently with a guy named Brian, who's got a channel named Channel BK, which shout out to him. You may already know how I feel about this record, and it's only now I'm finally doing a full review of the record. But yeah, if you want to hear some of my thoughts on this record through that, you can go to Channel BK and watch that. And you've probably seen it on my top 50 albums of the year, and you may have noticed I had this at number 2, so big fan of this record. I'll go into more detail about it later in the video, but here's the album cover, which very much illustrates that this album was actually recorded in a cave as well, which is kind of interesting. And then there's the back. There's 11 songs on the record, and it's over 49 minutes long, and released under Phoebe Bridgers' Satisfactory Records. So this is kind of where her relationship with Phoebe kind of comes full circle here. And here's there are the lyrics there and the liner notes on it as well. And on the back you have some very cool pictures from inside the cave, and even places where some of the instruments were like located, like the harp or the drum kit, stuff like that. And just a standard black vinyl. Here's side A, and then side B. There's also a download card in there as well. And funny thing is, also in here is it says on this little slip of paper, please cut and paste the following spelling correction into the violin section of the credits, which, yeah, specifically it'd be Odessa Hartman, which should be spelled Odetta Hartman, which, fun fact, I do know who that is. One of the more ambitious and experimental figures within indie folk. I actually reviewed her last record, Old Rockhounds Never Die, so cool to see a familiar name on the record. And that is the packaging for the vinyl of Madison, the latest record from Sloppy Jane. So, like I said, I had already kind of been familiar with Sloppy Jane in the past, because I know Phoebe had mentioned in interviews how she had played bass in this band. It wasn't until years later that I finally sort of learned about them, and kind of learned that Haley Dahl is kind of an interesting and somewhat unpredictable performer. I mentioned her live performances, which you are the kind of thing you kind of have to just see for yourself. But for this album, she's kind of stripped away some of the punk attitude for something that is very lush and kind of grandiose in terms of the arrangements. There's a lot of strings and horns, glockenspiel, harp, and there's also some flutes and things like that as well. And a lot of the inspiration seems to be pulling from the likes of Kate Bush or the Beatles in terms of how they kind of approached music in sort of very lush kind of way. And also recording it in Lost World Caverns in West Virginia. So yes, recording and performing everything in a cave, and even kind of conceptualizing the album within the cave as well. But there are a lot of other themes throughout the record that I will go into a little more detail about as I talk about the track list. So the album opens with Overture, which, as the title suggests, is very much an opening to the project and introduces the very grand arrangements that are used throughout this record, the strings, the horns, and what have you. And it very beautifully, I think, sets the tone for the LP, and it does a good job of managing to be very lovely, but also just very creepy and unsettling at the same time, sort of like a horror film score in a way. And I love the sort of bombastic climax the song reaches through the end with these huge bass drums and kind of devilish sounding strings and trumpets. And then it flows very well into the next track, Party Anthem, which is like the first actual song on the LP. And the lyrics on this track could not be more dark and kind of a little too real in some places, even as it has poeticisms like imprisoned in a wedding pigeon body with a tin can face, which sort of tells you that the song kind of deals with kind of how body image and how sometimes women can kind of feel misrepresented in a way. Sort of introduces some of the themes, some of the motifs that will occur throughout the record, whether we're talking about policemen or men or personal trauma. And these lyrics are kind of messed up in a way, even as the arrangements are just so gorgeous. And I love the pianos and the strings and the way that song transitions into that slightly more Beach Boys-esque kind of second half with a very operatic performance from Haley on there. Then the 7-minute Jesus in Your Living Room Floor, which is probably my favorite track on the record, really is another song that goes pretty in depth into drama and clearly some sort of like terrible experience from Haley's life, which I'm not going to speculate too much, but I kind of just recommend you pay attention to the lyrics and you'll understand. And also the way she sings it just sounds so cool and kind of eerie. The way she's like, "When I finally die, won't you bury me in the same suit that you married her in?" Like it's just so dramatic, and I think sells that whole thing very well. And I just love the way the song progresses, and we get some more tense piano chords and that lovely slide guitar, and then in the second half we have these orchestral swells that very much reflect this experience and kind of build tension very well throughout as the lyrics get significantly more grotesque as it goes on. And it also has one of the most haunting choruses on the entire LP, and just a harrowing climax with Climax, where we get more drums, and the arrangements sound so big, and I think I'm even hearing like this barrage of people screaming as well, which is, yeah, kind of eerie. And I love the attention to detail going on cuts like this, especially at the end of the song, where basically we get a straight minute of just the drums playing for like 4 bars, which really shows how kind of unorthodox a lot of these song structures are. Judy's Bedroom is definitely a more quaint, kind of twee track on the record. It's an acoustic cut and kind of sounds like some sort of like singer-songwriter ballad from the 70s. It like sounds beautiful and has these wonderful la-la harmonies on it, but the lyrics could not uh, be more messed up. Like and I've even heard Fantano point out that the song could potentially be inspired. The subject matter could be inspired by the murder of Judy Bruce from the 70s, which I didn't really know that until Fantano had brought that up in his review of this record. But like lines of like gels and ribbons for her hair, it's like, yeah, it's kind of it's just so kind of gruesome in a way, how this thing is described, and also that final refrain could not be more tragic. The tragic. Then we have an interlude in Bianca Castafiore, which which Fantano did mention is apparently referring to a Tintin character also had a who also was an opera singer, which is why the vocals on this track are just so over the top and very operatic, like even more so than like any other moment on the record. And it's kind of this kooky, sort of demented waltz in a way. And when I first heard this track, I wasn't too big a fan, and it took a couple more listens for me to really like settle in with it. But I think this is a really cool, very fun moment on the record that I think is that I think adds to the album flow. I think very well. Like the fact that the album is sequenced from like Judy's Bedroom to this track to the significantly more grand Lullaby for Mika, I think is really smart kind of sequencing right there. Which Lullaby for Mika is a track that has kind of this lullaby feel with the pianos, and the arrangements are just so like lovely and precise. But on top of that, we have kind of bizarre lyrics that kind of bring up another motif that you'll hear throughout the record a lot, which is like toy horses, which I've mentioned this in my What's on Repeat. I think she either uses the toy horse thing either as a metaphor or as some sort of symbolism of something that protects you from harm or something like that. But the song kind of this is one of those songs where I think a bit of ambiguity is definitely shown. Like really clearly, this is open for interpretation here because so especially how grotesque some of the lines could get at certain points, and I think the way that different instruments and certain passages are revealed throughout these verses, I think is done really well as well throughout its 8 verses, and also very smart use of people laughing thing throughout, which kind of occurs extensively throughout the track, and I think is applied in a way that makes it sound very eerie. And also like that ending verse ends things on a kind of creepy note, which I like with those vocal harmonies, and yeah. Then we go into the title track, Madison, which has some of the most lovely arrangements on the record, and in my opinion, some of my favorite melodic progressions on the LP as well. Uh, even as the lyrics about swallowing quick, dry, and concrete, or also the "Why would Tina Turner leave me" line is definitely kind of an unexpected sort of clever line there, and I really like the way the instrumentation sounds, and it definitely sounds very much like a classic piece of chamber pop that you would hear from like the 60s or the 70s, like definitely very cool to see a kind of subverted take on that sound. And then the second half of the song, it's kind of like a symphony the way this song is structured, especially as the back half of the song allows the orchestra to really breathe and really bloom as well. And also there are these moments that are very precise, whether there's a gong hit at one point, or you'll even hear the strings for a few bars followed by what sounds like a bunch of people like shushing, going shh, something like that, which is kind of crazy. And then it ends with the lead melody of the song on a piano, which is kind of why I kind of look at the song as the closest this album comes to a symphony on the project. If you want a more straightforward rock-infused cut, Wilt is probably going to be the song for you, but yet it doesn't feel safe or anything like that. It still feels very out there and kind of in a whole different world, especially in the second half when we introduce campy synths and more pianos and kind of naturally cavernous reverbs, which I think are applied very well on the song. And it's arguably the most accessible track on the record, but yet still done in a very creative way. Wonderama is probably the one track where I think the strings and the orchestral instrumentation is enabled to shine the most, and I love those woodwinds and the way the different instruments are recorded, and also how the song for the most part is one of the more lovely and beautiful sounding tracks on the record. So even if it turns a little bit unsettling, settling near the middle when the strings are doing that, which really reminds me. This kind of reminds me of something off a John Williams score, or like any other sort of great movie score you could think of. But arguably the most ambitious piece on the entire record is the 9-minute epic, The Constable, which is technically kind of the end to the record, and goes through all these different movements and features arguably the weirdest vocal performance on the entire LP. She's sort of singing in this very raspy way. It kind of reminds me a little bit of maybe when, it kind of reminds me of Conor Oberst when he would break into vocal performances like that. Or she even kind of sounds like a pirate on the song, which is kind of campy, but it oddly enough kind of works. And given just how terrifying the lyrics are, I think it kind of makes sense that that the vocal performance is intentionally a little bit grating on this song. And normally, but like I don't mean this in like a criticizing way. I mean it more in just like an observational way. Like it sounds really kind of off kilter, but in a really fantastic way. And I love the different melodic progressions throughout the song, and the way it builds, and of course you'll get very twisted, kind of gross imagery like a thousand pink slugs crawling out of crawling out of your skull, and and things like that. And then the toy horse thing comes up, and I think I even heard sound effects of maybe like a literal toy horse being recorded in a cave, that sort of clattering noise. Like you really have to listen carefully, or maybe even with headphones, to understand what I'm talking about, as it's kind of buried underneath all the big instrumentation. And I also love the different key changes that happen throughout. It's really smooth, and then that midsection has that sort of Beatlesy tone, and it has the da 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 da, da, like those instantly catchy melodies before it has a kind of tragic finish. Not only with the apocalyptic imagery in the lyrics, but also with also for like 3 minutes, straight minutes, uh, you'll hear what sounds like people doing these like counting to 10 Happy New Year chants near the end, which is another thing that really requires you to kind of listen carefully, or just I honestly just crank up the volume to hear this more. But the way it kind of dissipates until the very end, I think is really cool. And then the album closes with a bit of an acoustic epilogue, which is, I think, the perfect way to end the record. I mean, this is the one song where all the orchestral arrangements are pretty much stripped away, and instead you get Haley with a guitar, basically making a very fitting conclusion to the record, reiterating some of the motifs, but also really getting kind of personal and sort of uncomfortable on this track, and also but then there are also these very cool kind of precise moments on the record, like at one point in the song I'm hearing what sounds like maybe seagulls gawking, or maybe even fireworks going off. Really interesting kind of field recording. And also the beginning of the song, it kind of sounds like a synth, and maybe this helicopter going up into the sky. And plus the ending line of I am hiding from the man I hit with my car is a really cool kind of unsettling kind of way to end the record. And you're just sort of sitting there like, what? Like, wait, like, that's the end of the record? This is definitely an album that kind of messes with your head in a lot of places, and I can't help but appreciate it for that reason. So yeah, I think Madison is a phenomenal record. I absolutely love the shit out of this album. It definitely was a very unexpected surprise. It kind of came out of nowhere for me, and I would have never expected that that this album would sort of sound the way it does, or that it would pan out as well as it did, because I think it really is something special, and it kind of is a shame that it's being slept on by too many people, but hopefully after my review, more people will check out this record. And it's definitely not going to be for everyone. It is a very kind of theatrical, over-the-top LP that may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it definitely is an experience that I can't recommend enough, that you give yourself the time to really take in, because it has wonderful arrangements, great songwriting, great singing performances, very smart sequencing and album flow as well. I have no idea what Sloppy Jane are going to do next, considering this doesn't sound like anything they've done before. But I am rather curious to see where they go from here, because this album is really something special, and I do think it is something I am just very spellbound by every time I hear it. So yes, I gotta give this album a 10. I gotta give it a 10. Like, I don't really have any complaints about this thing whatsoever. It's probably my favorite chamber pop album of the 2020s. maybe even one of my favorites in the genre, period. And yeah, come 2022, we'll see what ends up topping it. So yeah, that's my review of Madison, the latest record from Sloppy Jane, and I'll see you for episode 294.